welcome. I'm so glad you have decided to join me for this first episode of the mini-series called Dear Mr. and Miss Ogyny. I'd like to start with a story. In fact, it's a riddle. Here goes. A father and his son are in a terrible car crash. Tragically, the father is killed instantly and his son is rushed to the hospital. The surgeon walks into the operating room, takes one look at the boy and says, "I can't operate on this boy. He's my son." Who is the surgeon? What was your gut instinct answer? Hold on to that answer, that first answer that you hit you, and we'll revisit this story later. But first, let me share a true story from my own life. It was December 1999, and I was on my first overseas trip with my 5-year-old daughter. We'd been travelling through Italy and were now in Geneva in Switzerland. From there, we were catching a bus to a ski station in the French Alps called La Clusaz. Now, I've travelled this route many times before, mostly by car, so I knew how challenging the drive was. It's a narrow, one-lane mountain road with countless blind corners, sharp hairpin turns and pretty heavy traffic. Add winter conditions, snow, ice, fog, and you have what I like to call extreme driving. It's not for the faint-hearted. So my daughter and I arrive at the bus stop. The bus pulls up, and as I see the driver, my gut reaction is, we are not getting on this bus. My instant thought, that's not a proper bus driver. Why? Because the driver was a woman. As soon as I had this reaction, I stopped myself. What the actual? What the hell was I thinking? Here I am, an educated, well-travelled, enlightened woman, and yet I had this immediate irrational reaction. And I was mortified when I caught myself. I'm female. I'm an excellent driver. Why on earth would I think that this female driver wasn't an excellent driver as well? Anyway, I caught myself. I was stunned at my first reaction. But I challenged my own bias and I got on the bus, and you know what? It was probably the safest I've ever felt on a mountain road. The driver was fantastic. She navigated every hairpin turn and crazy other driver with absolute precision and great concentration. She was fantastic. Now, this incident stayed with me. It made me realise just how deep unconscious gender bias runs, even in people who don't consciously believe in traditional gender roles, and I'm one of those people. So when I look back on that moment, I see it as a wake-up call. It made me question how these biases might be influencing my behaviour, my insecurities, and even my values. For instance, how do I react when I hear phrases like boys will be boys and all teenage girls are moody? Well, I choose my battles. I do now. Back in the day, I probably didn't. Sometimes I'll just smile and nod. And other times I will climb up on my soapbox and launch into a full-on rant about gender stereotypes and how they often excuse just poor behaviour. So this episode is exploring something deeply personal and probably thought-provoking and probably a bit controversial about whether females feed into misogynistic values and attitudes and behaviours. I think that unconscious gender bias is probably something we all carry, no matter how progressive or enlightened we consider ourselves to be. And here's the thing, I don't consider myself a feminist. I don't like labels. If you need to apply a label, I guess I'm a humanist. We're all human and we all deserve to be seen and valued as individuals. Still, here I am confronting how my own unconscious gender biases manifest in my own life. Having done some reflection, I've identified 3 key areas where I think my biases show up, and they probably affect other people, particularly men. Well, not just particularly men, but people that I interact with. The first area is imposter syndrome. Now, this is my Achilles heel, especially in job interviews. How often do I doubt my own abilities, even though I'm qualified and experienced? How much of that doubt is tied to deeply ingrained gender expectations? The second area that I think it comes out in is ageism. Sometimes I've blamed negative interactions on ageism, but if I'm honest, could it be that my own biases are at play too? Am I too quick to assume others are judging me based on my age and maybe appearance? I don't know. The third area, which I think I've carried with me for the last many years, is mum guilt. What a classic that is. That constant pressure to be the perfect mother. How much of my mum guilt comes from social expectations rooted in traditional gender roles? Mum guilt is a big one. Yeah. Anyway, let's get back to the riddle we started with. Remember the story about the surgeon? Did you figure it out? What was your answer? The question was, who is the surgeon? The answer? She's the boy's mother. How long did it take you to arrive at that answer? If it wasn't immediate, did you feel bad? Well, if you did, don't feel bad, because a lot of people don't get the right answer or don't get the answer at all. This riddle, I think, it's not a test, but I think it is good in highlighting just how ingrained our unconscious biases can be. I told this riddle to a group of senior students at a college last year, so 2024. And it was full of educated, insightful students who considered themselves critical thinkers. There were a lot of non-binary and LGBTQI plus students in the audience. There were a few very vocal feminists, and in fact, the entire cohort in that particular group were pretty shocked at their own reactions because they considered that they didn't have these gender biases. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. So what can we do about it? I think acknowledging that it exists in females, like are we as females perpetuating some of the misogynistic values and attitudes and behaviours that we have to deal with every day. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. I think the key challenge is to pause and reflect and ask ourselves, why do I think that? And it doesn't have to be just about gender bias. I mean, it could be about anything. So let's call out our own biases before we start pointing fingers. And my story is just one example of an experience that I have. And it's a personal one. I could tell stories about my experiences in the workplace where my own unconscious gender bias, I know, has influenced opportunities or lack thereof for me in the workplace. But yeah, that's another podcast episode in itself. Thank you for listening to this episode of Dear Mr. and Miss Ogyny. If today's discussion resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever caught yourself in a moment of unconscious gender bias? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories. So join the conversation if you want to. Just get in touch. Anyway, until next time, thanks for listening.